Okay, folks, here we're asking the question, does Isom number one save the cat? Now, this is kind of a spin-off video from a previous one I did, taking apart the critique done by Dick Masterson of The Biggest Problem of the Universe of the book Isom number one by Eric July. And in that takedown video, I basically showed how Dick Masterson had about 3 good things to say in terms of critiquing Isom, and also about 74 dumb or useless things to say. And one of the useless things that I found at the time was this little quotation, which I didn't even bother to address in that video. It just basically said, you need a save the cat moment. Well, I've heard of Save the Cat before. I know it's a book on screenwriting by Blake Snyder, but I've never actually heard of what the book includes. What is it about the Save the Cat structure that makes it so appealing to so many people? Until I watched a video by writer Brandon McNulty. I really highly recommend this guy's YouTube videos if you want to learn more about writing. He does a lot of showing you what is good and bad about various movies today, and can also give you a lot of great insights into writing. And he's got a video called 3 Things Save the Cat Gets Wrong. Well, I'm not going to go into any of his 3 things. You can watch his video if you like. But he does, in that video, give an explanation of what is in Save the Cat. And basically what he shows is that we all know that most stories have a 3-act structure. You've got Act 1, which is the first quarter of the story, in which we meet the hero in his present circumstances. This basically sets up the drama to come. Then Act 2 is the middle 50% of the story. The hero faces a bunch of challenges that force him to change. And then Act 3 is where the hero overcomes the villain and has shown growth and personal change. And so all really popular movies and such tend to follow this 3-act structure. Now, what Save the Cat does is break this structure down into 15 points that are still contained within 3 acts, but they're broken down much more granularly. For example, in Act 1, you start with an opening image in the first 1% of your story, and this introduces the hero or the setting or the story in some way, usually in some encapsulated image. Then, around 5% of the way in, you get the theme stated, and this gives an idea of what your story is about. The setup belongs to the first 10%, and that shows, it contains the opening image and the stating of the theme, but it basically introduces us to the hero and describes the hero in his everyday circumstances, including why the hero is unhappy in some way, shape, or form. The hero may be experiencing a kind of contentedness at this point, but in order to find true happiness, the hero is going to have to get out of his comfort zone. And that's where the catalyst comes in. By the way, I'm not copying these percentages specifically from the video because I think I've adjusted them in a way to make them a little bit more continuous. But the catalyst is what comes in and gives the hero a reason to leave his comfort zone, to leave those everyday circumstances and effectively go on an adventure. So then you have the rest of Act 1 being basically the debate, whatever else it is that spurs that hero on to go on the adventure rather than just stay home and stay in his humdrum life. And last but not least, we've got the decision to go on the adventure. And that takes us into Act 2. Act 2 starts with fun and games, and this basically takes up the majority of the first half of the second act. We've got a whole bunch of challenges that are thrown at the hero as the hero is trying to make progress toward whatever goal the hero has. Now, parallel with that, there is also a B story usually. It's a subplot that spurs the hero to learn and grow, whether by interacting with various supporting characters or having to solve other problems in the hero's life. The B story kind of runs parallel with the main story. And then you come to the midpoint of the main story, in which the hero experiences some sort of victory or defeat that is not complete, You can't have a complete victory, or else the story would be over right then and there, and likewise, you can't have a complete defeat, or else the hero would be taken completely out of the game and the story's over. Either way, if this were complete, the story would be over, but it's not complete, and so we get to see what consequences result from this false victory or false defeat, and the stakes get higher now. Then things just progress from bad to worse throughout the end of Act 2. You've got the bad guy closing in which things start to get ugly for the hero. And then you have this all is lost moment in which things really go wrong, up to and including a supporting character's death. It's like things cannot possibly get worse from here. So the hero, having experienced this trauma and tragedy, goes through a dark night of the soul and has to psychologically regroup and come back to possession of himself, and then become the person he needs to be in order to take on the villain again. And that leads us to the resolution where the hero charges back into the fight. Now, Act 3 is pretty simple. You've got the finale. The hero faces the villain again, and this time achieves total victory over the villain, and then you've got the closing image, which should echo back to the opening image and give us an idea of how the hero has changed and progressed over time. The hero should not necessarily be the same person at the end as he was at the beginning, and the contrast between the opening and the closing image can give us that understanding of the difference. And one of my favorite examples of this is in Jurassic Park. There's a scene at the opening where basically you realize there's a guy who's uncomfortable around kids, and then the closing image shows him comfortable around kids. And so it kind of shows how he has grown as a person, as an adult, as having to basically put his fears of handling children aside and get into the father-minded mode that his girlfriend would like him to be. So that's an example of closing image versus opening image contrast. Now, as I was reading through or watching the video and thinking to myself about Isom number 1, I found that many of these items that we see here are in Isom number 1. In fact, pretty much all of them are, up to a certain point. For example, when we have the opening image, Isom number 1, because it starts with a prologue, starts with 2 opening images. And one of those opening images is this scene of Florispark, where you just have, police and citizens interacting normally. It's a peaceful day out. People are just out and enjoying their day. Multicultural city, nothing exciting going on. And likewise, you've got the opening scene of Avery's ranch, where he's just out enjoying the day and exercising outdoors before he is interrupted by his phone call. And so everything is peaceful in our opening images. But then we get to the theme stated, and the theme stated comes subtly in 2 points. One is where Yaira returns to Florispark, and we get this notion that, here goes all of the stability that we had. And likewise, when Avery is going to go to the city to confront Darren, we also get this idea that stability is a thing of the past. And that really becomes the theme of Isom number 1, is that this false sense of security that you have is about to be dispelled. And that's really the theme that's being stated there. You're either going to find that items of the past are coming back to haunt you, or you're going to go and find and confront items of your past, and you're not going to come away from that unscathed. So the loss of stability, the idea of the false security going away, that is the theme of Isom number 1. We have the setup of Isom number 1 describing the hero in his everyday circumstances. That's where we see Avery out exercising on the ranch. And we also get a sense of a potential unhappiness here, in that he looks in this scene to be very, very isolated. There are people on the ranch, but he himself is alone exercising. And even when he goes back to his security house to go tell Sam to make sure that the team prepares Jim's order, because he's going to be gone, he kind of gives an indication that he himself is not even necessary to the operation of his own ranch. So it feels like Avery Silman is a man who's just completely disconnected, and that lack of connection can be the unhappiness that we see in the setup. Now, of course, the catalyst is the phone call that he gets from his sister Altona, and Altona is telling him that there is a missing girl that she'd like him to find and to get information on from his old friend Darren, who is now mixed up with criminal enterprises. And so that's basically the spur to get out of his comfort zone, is that there's somebody out there in need. Now, there is some small debate. It's not a huge amount, but there is some basically saying, look, I wanted to get out of the city for a reason. I don't want to go back there. However, I do have respect for my mom, and my mom, would like me to. This is something that my mom would like me to do. If I didn't do it, she'd probably kill me. I'm going to have to satisfy my tie of duty to my mother and also to this woman who everybody liked. And basically have to step outside my comfort zone, hopefully only for a little while. And then, of course, we have the decision where he does decide to go on the adventure. Now, the rest of Isom number 1 basically falls into the fun and games category. Everything from his encountering Darren to his then revealing that he's an accept, and then getting his butt kicked by a bigger accept, and then winding up in a hospital and discharging himself from the hospital only to wander through the alleys with his butt crack out, and then later going back to Darren's club and finding the girl that he's been looking for and getting interrupted in his gentle questioning of her by Darren's men, and then his taking Darren's men back to the club and starting a new fight, and then re-encountering the accept who trashed him in the beginning, and then their epic battle outside. All of that falls into the fun and games category of Act 2. Now, there's also a B story that occurs. That B story is Avery's encounter with Yaira. So Yaira has come back to Florispark, and Avery has an accidental encounter with her, during which time she uses her super speed on him. And now, one of the subtle things about Isom that really should have been more explicitly stated is that it appears he's able to copy the powers in some way, or at least mimic or reproduce the powers of people who use their powers upon him. So when Yaira uses her super speed on him, he is later, in his next conflict with Santuan, able to use a version of her super speed on Santuan in order to basically conquer Santuan through not just strength, but also strength and speed when he combines the two to project himself off of a wall and through another wall. And that is how he defeats Santuan. Now, that marks the midpoint of the story because his victory over Santuan is not a complete victory overall for the story. He still doesn't know what kind of trouble Jasmine is in. He still doesn't know where Darren is and how Darren factors into this. All he knows is that now the police are on to him, thinking that he's some sort of criminal. And he also knows that he's put his family in danger. He goes back to Altona and says, Darren knows us. He could be planning something. And sure enough, Darren is. So this is where the stakes get raised. And basically, that's it for Isom number 1. I mean, we do have another section in which Avery goes to get his costume, but that's kind of beside the point right now. What we've got here is kind of a midpoint portion. We've got everything that takes us halfway through the story, which, by the way, makes sense because we do know that Isom number 1 is part 1 of the ill-advised arc. So in part 1, you expect to get that first half. You don't expect to get that later half. And I think this is where Dick Masterson and others like Ethan Van Sciver are going wrong when they say that the story structure of Isom is flawed and that there's no story there and that kind of thing, because they're expecting to see all of this, both the purple points and the red points, they're expecting to see all of that in Isom number 1. But we live in the era of decompressed storytelling, in which you basically can tell a story continuously over multiple books, and people don't expect you to have like opening and closing scenes anymore. And so what we've got here is Isom number 1 being everything up through the midpoint. Now, and it's evidenced by the fact that in another quote that Dick Masterson gives in his 74 useless things to say is that there's no dark night of the soul. Well, where is the dark night of the soul appear? Well, it's in the red, but yet he's expecting that to occur in Isom number 1. And so I think that's really where a lot of people are going wrong and saying that I expect to see all of this occur in Isom number 1, when the fact is that the purple portion is what occurs in Isom number 1, and Isom number 2 is what we should expect to see all of the rest of the information, from bad guy closes in all the way on down. Now, basically, Isom number 2 completely shits the bed on this whole structure at this point. I'm not going to try and defend Isom number 2 and say that it follows the Save the Cat pattern in any way, shape, or form. Isom number 2 is a freaking train wreck. So I think the only hope we have of seeing the Save the Cat breakdown followed through is in Isom number 3, whenever that ever comes out. But Isom number 1 does capture those for that first section of points. But what about that Save the Cat moment? And there's a difference between the Save the Cat breakdown structure and the Save the Cat moment. And I want to make sure I don't overlook that, because otherwise people are going to come back and say, yeah, but you didn't really address the question. And that also begs the question, what is a Save the Cat moment? A Save the Cat moment is a moment toward the beginning of the story that establishes the hero as someone the audience should care about and root for. And so many people think that this has to mean that the hero does something good, and that this shows the hero to be a truly humane individual. I think Ethan Van Sciver's interpreted it this way several times. You know, the guy actually has to go out and save a cat, basically. You know, he encourages a child, or he saves an old lady from getting run over by a car, or even stops a robbery or something to show that the guy is indeed a hero. Now, the problem with this interpretation of Save the Cat is that there are loads of very, very popular pop culture properties where nothing of the kind takes place. Many significant works create empathy with the hero by showing instead the hero being put upon by others. For example, Luke Skywalker. If you watch Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, where you get introduced to him, he doesn't do anything heroic or even particularly noble through the first portion of the film, in which he's basically helping his aunt and uncle on the moisture farm on Tatooine. Rather, his aunt and uncle are trying to dampen down his dreams of becoming a fighter pilot and possibly joining the Rebel Alliance. You know, he's got dreams of adventure. He's like a typical teenager. He wants something more for himself beyond the borders of his simple home life. And because he wants those bigger and better things, and because his aunt and uncle wish to see that tamped down within him, we empathize with him, and we want to see him find that greater life that he knows he can get. Same thing with Harry Potter. Harry Potter doesn't do anything heroic in the first portion of the stories. Rather, we root for him because his aunt and uncle and cousin, the Dursleys, treat him so badly that when the invitation to join the Hogwarts Academy comes, and we realize that he's a wizard and he's got this whole new world that's going to open up in front of him, yeah, we want to see him take advantage of that. We want to see him succeed in this new world where previously he'd just been shut up under a cupboard. And then we've got John Connor from Terminator 2. You know, we know this kid's bound for great things, but He's been raised by a crazy-ass single mother who has messianic plans for him. She thinks he's going to save the world someday. How could he not develop into a troubled kid who, instead of, going to school and keeping his nose clean, is out being a truant and basically trying to avoid getting picked up by the truancy police, who he thinks is the Terminator, who he originally thinks the Terminator is. And so you've got these not unlikable characters, but at the same time, they're not heroes in any respect. They're just people who have been put upon so badly by other people or by the circumstances of life that we empathize with them. And so the save the cat moment in their particular respects does not come as a good deed, nor does it come that way for Avery Silman. He's got a stable, productive life as an entrepreneur outside of Florespark, and he doesn't want this life disrupted. So this is a guy who just basically wants to keep to himself. He's a member of the community in good standing, and he's just basically a normal guy. He's got issues stemming from his past that he'd really rather not deal with, and doesn't that fit us all in some way, shape, or form? He's got sufficient respect for his mother, though, that he's willing to act against his own interests and shoulder a burden that isn't really his. And that sense of duty to his mother is something that we can look upon as a positive aspect of his character. He also has the personal courage to decide that he'll confront an old friend whom he knows has criminal ties. How many of us would actually go and do the same thing if we knew that somebody had been rising in the ranks of a criminal enterprise? If you knew that your friend from the streets, was now a made guy in the mob, essentially, would you really want to get back in touch with that guy? I don't think so. And yet, because he is willing to set his own personal interests aside, he comes across as courageous for this reason. Moreover, he's got enough conscientiousness as a small business owner to make sure that his customers are taken care of in his absence. So he's not just thinking of himself, he's also thinking of the people whom he has obligations to. Now, all of that should be sufficient to establish Avery Silman as the hero of the book and generate a positive connection between him and the audience. Now, unless, as a lot of, Rippaverse haters already have, there are people who do not look at Avery Silman. There are people who look at Avery Silman as an Eric July self-insert, and so they hate Avery Silman on account of their believing that he reflects Eric July. Now, for those people, I don't think it's going to get through, because they've already decided they hate Eric July. If Avery Silman is a self-insert of Eric July, they're going to find reasons to despise him. And so these other points that I'm making, they're just going to basically brush those aside and say, well, that's not enough to win me over. Moreover, there's a bunch of hypocrisy that is going on in the critique of Isom number 1, in that you hear the complaint that Avery should have left when Darren, the crime boss, asked him to, and that Avery didn't, that he instead attacked Darren's bouncers makes Avery a villain rather than a hero, and his refusal to leave peacefully constitutes a reverse save the cat moment. But has that ever been true for characters like Batman or Daredevil, when they have gone to some seedy underworld joint looking for information about some criminal plot, sometimes one involving a missing person, and they go and attack the people in the bar? You always see these scenes of Daredevil or Batman going around to get information, and it's always these things of they're holding some unconscious thug by the collar, and it's like, who's going to tell me what I want to know? And these Batman and Daredevil, they're like moral vigilantes. They're not Harley Quinn or the Punisher. They're the ones we're supposed to think are actual good guys, and yet here they are going around terrorizing the underworld, when the underworld that day may have done nothing to them. So there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. We all know, if you're an experienced comics reader, that operating outside the law is just part and parcel of the hero trade in comics. And to see Avery do exactly the same thing that a Batman or a Daredevil would do it's just hypocritical to complain about that. So does Isom number one save the cat? I think it does. I think it does quite well, considering that it's only, half of a story, and yet it fulfills all of the save the cat points up to the midpoint. And it also has that save the cat moment in the opening scenes where you see Avery as an upstanding citizen who doesn't need to put himself in danger, except that out of a sense of duty, he will. And so I don't see a reason not to sympathize with that character unless you've already resolved to hate the character. And unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of these so-called critics have done. All right, I'm Mike Partika. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will subscribe and like this video, and hopefully you'll get notifications of future videos. I think next up I will make a return to Core Draft The Reckoning and see where that is going. And then if I manage to get done with Core Draft The Reckoning in a good amount of time, then it should be time to return to Cyberfrog 2 Wrecked Planet. So please do subscribe and check on those notifications so that you will get notified of the next videos I put out. I'm Mike Partika. Thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you later.